Welcome back to the channel, guys. This week we're going to tackle some Latin-infused gypsy jazz. This one's become something of a modern standard amongst gypsy jazz players and is likely to be called at every jam session. Originally written in the 1980s by Dorado Schmidt, he's one of my favourite living gypsy jazz players. It's well worth checking him and the rest of his family out. It's a whole family full of talented guitar players and musicians. Now obviously for the performance at the start of the video you saw me playing a couple of acoustic guitars. I'm going to teach it on the electric just because it's easier with the way I've got everything set up. It's plugged in direct, doesn't bleed into the mic too much, more convenient. And it also highlights that this kind of music sounds great on electric or acoustic. It really doesn't matter, to be honest. Originally this was played in E minor, but we're going to move it to D minor because it seems commonly that's where people play it nowadays. As always, get comfortable playing it in both, but we're going to go D minor. As the name would suggest, this is a bossa nova kind of a rhythm. And unlike fingerstyle bossa nova, where that's the sort of pattern you're going to be hearing, with the plectrum-based playing, like in gypsy jazz, the rhythm's a little different. It sounds like this. Right, so let's form a D minor chord in the left hand and dial in this right hand rhythm. Now it's all alternate strokes, so we're going down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. That would be a full bar of eighth notes, and that would sound like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Now within that we're going to introduce a couple of muted hits. So the left hand is going to just lift off the wood of the fingerboard slightly, keep the fingers on the strings, and this is the sound you want. Totally dead, no notes, just muted dryness. Percussive. We add it on beat 2. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and also on beat 4. So 2 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Slowed down. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now a couple of little notes about the right hand here. Those muted strikes have to be loud. Don't be shy about them. Really still strike all 6 strings. And put the onus on the left hand to really have to accurately mute those strings so you don't get any wild notes coming through. From experience, I've also found that people accidentally kind of swing this rhythm a little bit sometimes when they're first getting used to it. Got to be totally straight, no swing whatsoever, which means you've got to kind of stiffen the wrist a little more than usual with this kind of stuff and get most of the action happening from the elbow onwards. Don't let it become... which kind of comes courtesy of a loose wrist. Keep the wrist tight. Keep everything straight. Check out the links in the description if you'd like to get hold of my lesson materials. You can sign up to my Patreon, where for a small monthly cost you get access to all of my lesson materials, plus a lot of bonus material too, and transcriptions. Or you can purchase just this lesson in particular at the Gumroad link. I really pride myself on being very thorough and tidy with my lesson materials. Everything's typed up nice and neat. You have the tab, the notation, and the chord grids, finger numbers also. You'll have Guitar Pro and PDF formats. I also include my backing track and my play-along reference track. Your support is massively appreciated. These videos do take quite a bit of time and effort to put together. Another way to show your support that costs absolutely nothing is just to like and subscribe and comment. Makes a massive difference. Thanks, guys. Okay, now let's get onto the intro and look at some of the chord shapes. We start with this D minor, which, by the way, all the way through the song, when we play this D minor, we're not actually including the top E string, so you don't need to bar the top string. Just these 4 strings in the middle we're interested in. Still have that first finger leaning against the top E, so you can dampen it out. Same with the low E. Let the tip of that first finger just very slightly touch the low E string. Don't rest it on it, but rest it kind of into it, if you see what I mean, from underneath. We do 1 bar of that, and then we're going to climb along the D string 1 fret at a time. So this 7th fret's going to move up to 8, but all your other notes have to stay. So you have to reshuffle the fingers and play this shape here, D minor with a sharpened 5th. And then we stretch that little finger out 1 fret further. Now you've got D minor 6, and then bring it back the way you came. So it's like the James Bond thing, really. until that point where we put a stop on the rhythm, and then we play a G7, G sharp 7, and an A7. We're in the key of D minor, so the A7 is the 5, and we're just walking up to it chromatically. So here's the whole intro at full speed. 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice how those last 3 hits I've used all downstrokes to give them some real emphasis. Then we have just a quick little 2-beat rest, and then we start the A section. Right, so the A section starts on D minor, we have 2 bars there. And then we go to an E7, but we put the 5th in the bass, so E7 over B. Also 2 bars. Now we have a 2-5-1 back to the D minor. E minor 7 flat 5, A7, D minor. But what I've chosen to do on the first time is something that you'll commonly see people do. We invert this E minor 7 flat 5. Now it's important to realise that these 4 notes also would be the same notes required to play a G minor 6 chord. Imagine you're playing G minor 6 here, for example. You can even see how the top 4 strings of that would be identical to this voicing here. All we're going to do differently is put the G in the bass as well. So the minor 3rd of your E minor 7 flat 5 is now in the bass, and you can just think of this as G minor 6. So we're going to play that, and then go to the A7. For this A7, you'll notice I'm using my sort of preferred approach of having the thumb hooked over for the root note, and then forming this little voicing in the middle here. If you've not seen my Jazz Survival Guide video, do check that out. I go over all of these really common jazz chord shapes. I'll link it in the description. And then we resolve to the D minor. So again, just to clarify, 2-5-1. We've inverted the 2 to make it a G minor 6. So in some ways you could now think of this as 4-5-1. And if you just think for a moment how we organize our keys, remember that 2 and 4 are both what we call subdominant chords. So the E minor 7 flat 5 and the G minor 6 are both serving the same purpose, they're serving the same function. So to summarize, 2-5-1 and 4-5-1 are the same thing. Okay, now at the end of that first A section we play the A7 again, just to send us back round for the second A section. I should mention that this tune falls into that very common structure in jazz, that A-A-B-A format. So you've got 2 A sections in a row. We're just about to start the second one. Now we could just copy and paste all of that A section and play it again here for our second A section. But as is often the case in these videos, I want to introduce a couple of variables just to keep things a bit fresh. So in our second A section, we'll keep the D minor the same to begin with. Then we'll go to our E7 over B. But we'll put in that tiny little bit of movement in the melody. Flat 9, and then back to the root. And then this time, instead of doing the 4-5-1, we'll actually play just the 2-5-1. So that 2-5-1, just to clarify, E minor 7 flat 5, A7, D minor. Okay, now we're on to the B section. So often you'll see the changes for the B section written out this way. A minor 7 flat 5, D7, G minor 7. Which if you think about it is another 2-5-1 in a minor key. The key of G minor. Which if we're in the key of D minor overall, that G minor is the 4. So you could think of this as 2-5 of 4. Now what you'll often hear a lot of Gypsy players do here is they'll simplify. Instead of playing 2-5, they'll kind of create a hybrid of those 2 chords. A diminished 7th. So it's like a diminished 3-note voicing, and then you've got your first finger barring to capture this 4th fret on the B string. With these 3-note voicings, by the way, if you've not seen my triad-based 3-note voicings video, you've got to check that out. It's really thorough. I go into a lot of depth on these voicings, so I'll link that in the description too. So A diminished 7 for 2 bars. Then the G minor 7. Instead of A minor 7 flat 5, D7, G minor 7. And then we're going to move up a whole tone. And again, instead of playing B minor 7 flat 5 to E7, we're going to just play B diminished 7th. I just want to really highlight that as a good option. You know, replacing a 2-5 with just the diminished from the 2. So you've got, in this case, B diminished 7th. That can be a really valuable thing to be aware of, especially when you get to playing lead over these changes. And instead of having to think fast about 2-5s, you can just think diminished over both of those. But anyway, that's something we'll get onto. I'll do a lead study on this piece soon as well. So that would be B diminished 7th for 2 bars. Now we're having a look over at the horizon and we can see that there's an A section on the way. That begins with a D minor, so we think, how do we get to that? Let's do a 2-5 again. E minor 7 flat 5 to A7, 1 bar of each. Again, I've gone for another option here though. Instead of going for E minor 7 flat 5 this way, I've gone for a voicing that's built off the low E string. This is a really good shape. So this would be the flat and 5th in the bass, minor 3rd, flat 7 and root. It just connects really nicely to that A7, that bass movement. Being a semitone apart is always going to sound really smooth. Now the final A section, again, we could just copy and paste any of the things we did in the previous A sections. But, like I say, want to keep this fresh, so let's look at another option. Let's play D minor 9, really push this Latin flavour. You know, a lot of the Bossanova music in the 60s favoured 9th chords, especially minor 9ths. So 2 bars there. Now we're thinking, what did we need next? We needed some kind of E7, right? What have we got within reach here? And what can we get by staying on all of the same strings? We can move a couple of things around. Just slide these 3 fingers back a semitone each while the little finger stays where it is, and now look what you've got. You've got an E major chord with a 3rd in the bass. Now halfway through those 2 bars on the E, I'm going to move that top note down a whole tone to the flat 7, so now you've got E7. Now we connect to the G minor 6 again. So we've got this, again, a really nice run of semitones. G minor 6 to the A7, back to the D minor. Now we're going to chuck an ending on it. That's going to be the same as the intro. We're going to do this. Right, onto the melody. Let's tackle that James Bond intro. So we're just going to play a D minor triad on the first string set, root, flat 3, 5. We're going to play this pattern. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then this time for us the climbing note is the top string. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now this time for us the climbing note is on the top string. Climb it again, descend, start another climb, put the stop in there, and then where the rhythm part goes G7, G sharp 7, A7, we play triads for those chords as well, just a G triad, G sharp, A. And then we're going to chuck in an extra little A7 with a flat 9. We're just using the diminished portion of the shape here on the top 4 strings. Okay, so here's our intro if we're playing the lead part. 1, 2, 3, 4. on to the A section. The melody. Aside from one note, this one, everything else there is from a D minor arpeggio. So you can be visualizing this D minor arpeggio. We play the 5th and the minor 3rd. And then we go on to the top string, where we bring in that little passing note, come down the arpeggio. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we take that bottom note, slide it down a semitone to coincide with beat 1 of bar number 3, where that E7 chord has now appeared. And you'll see that that is the major 3rd of that chord. So you've got D minor to the E7. Now on that E7 we're going to be bouncing around between the 3rd and the flat 9 and the root. Before again dropping the D string down another semitone, making it the G, the root of our G minor 6, or the minor 3rd of the E minor 7 flat 5, however you want to look at it. That top note there now would be the 6th of the G minor 6, or the root of the E minor 7 flat 5. So now we've got this, D minor, E7 with a bit of flat 9, G minor 6. Now we're on the A7, we're going to be thinking about an A7 arpeggio. We're going to isolate the D string to the B string octave. And we're going to play this little run on the B string. The 6th fret, of course, is from outside of our A7 arpeggio, but it's one of the scale degrees of the D harmonic minor scale in this case. And then we come down the A7 arpeggio, and then move down to the minor 3rd of the D minor chord that we've now resolved on top of. That little run up on the B string has to be played very fast. First 2 notes of it are 16th notes. You want to be able to get it from a loose flick of the wrist. It's worth practicing that kind of stuff. Then we play this little turnaround over the A7. We're going to play A7 with a flat 9. Again, there's a lot of flat 9 stuff in this song. That's kind of the theme here. Lots of flat 9, which has a diminished quality to it. Now, an interesting thing here about the diminished, if you were to lower the note on the G string by a semitone, you'd end up with what might be a more familiar looking way of playing A7. So really, we're just taking that A7, raising the root up a semitone to make the flat 9. Now you can think A7 flat 9. Now if we understand that this is also a diminished chord, we'll also know that we can move that around in minor 3rds to invert it. 4 times round and you're back where you started. As a side note, here's an exercise that I often get my students to do as a way of bolstering their understanding of the diminished-dominant relationship. So, we said that if we take this diminished and lower the note on the G string by a semitone, we get our A7 chord. So here's a question for you. If you take that diminished now and invert it by moving it up a minor 3rd, now which note needs to be lowered by a semitone to make A7? I'll give you a moment to think about it before I come back with the answer. Okay, so the answer, top string goes down a semitone, and now you've got A7. That would be the inversion of this. Okay, let's repeat the process. If we take that diminished up 3 frets again to invert it, now which note needs to be lowered by a semitone to make A7? Again, I'll give you a moment. So, the answer is the D string. Now you've got A7 with what could be seen as a D7 kind of shape. If you're thinking of your caged system, there's A7. Okay, the final one. Let's move that diminished up 3 more frets. Okay, now which note needs to be lowered to make A7? I'll give you till the end of the B section to figure that one out. So the answer is the note on the B string goes down a semitone to make an A7 voicing. Now, of course, moving up 3 frets more would take you back where you started. Okay, so back to the song. Let's take that diminished and get comfortable with the idea of moving it up in minor thirds. Now let's skip that second stop along the way. If you're tracing the first finger along, that would be the 2nd fret, the 8th fret, and the 11th. Now for the final strike, we push that little finger a semitone up to add the sharpened 5th. So this is like an A7 with a flat 9 and a sharp 5. Do a little bit of loosey-goosey Latin strumming. Now on to our second A section, which is very similar to the first one. You can add that little embellishment whenever you fancy. A little trill. Now on the A7, we go fully chromatic between the 5th and the flat 7. And then we come back up but skip the 7th fret. Slide up to the 10th fret to resolve on our D minor chord to its 5th. And then just come down a D minor triad. Okay, on to the B section. The melody here is beautiful. So that first little bit over the A diminished 7th. Frets 10, 8 and 11. And then a little bit back and forth between the 8 and the 11. Those notes, by the way, are from an A diminished arpeggio. Again, everything's just a minor third apart. Good way to get started playing over diminished chords. Just grab the root, slide it up and back in minor thirds. It's always going to sound pretty cool. Okay. Now we're on the G minor, we're thinking minor third and 5th. And then the B diminished, where we're going to grab this melody note, the same note that would be on the B string in the chord. And then we play a bluesy little run. D minor blues scale, bending up to that flattened 5th. Then on the A7, another little chromatic run, 5, 8, 7, 6, with a little trill to the 7 and back. If you hear that over the chord, getting some great tensions on that A7. Then the third A section again is very similar to the other two. And then to finish out, we play another bluesy phrase. Again, D minor blues scale, bending to the flat 5. Now this note is going to be the first note of our outro, which is going to be very much like the intro. Those same shapes, only we're starting the picking pattern on the G string this time and ascending. Go round again. Finish on the D minor triad. So that concludes laying the groundwork on learning this song. You know, the melody and the chords, very important to know. I'm going to do another video using this chord progression as a lead study, and we're going to look at ways to improvise over these changes. So in the meantime, get very comfortable with the basic chords and melody. So, on to this week's recommended listening. Of course, I recommend listening to Dorado Schmidt and his original version of this. Check out as much of his stuff as you can. He's a fantastic player. Personally, I think you see these players at their very best if you go on YouTube and search for live footage of them as opposed to album tracks. The spontaneity and the energy of the live performance always really hits different with this stuff. And again, do check out some of his family members. Latcho Schmidt is another modern favourite of mine. Brilliant player. There was a great film made back in the 1990s called Latcho Drom. It's an obscure film about the Gypsy jazz music and the community, and it really does well to embody the spirit and the energy of this music. and that features the Schmidt family heavily. Dorado, Cavallo, many others, as well as incredible players like Honor Winterstein. There's a couple of short excerpts from the film available on YouTube. I'm going to link to one of those in the description, so do check that out. Now, rather than just recommending other gypsy jazz players, let's go specifically down the sort of Latin-infused gypsy jazz route for a moment. I'd recommend listening to Gonzalo Bagheera. He's a modern gypsy jazz player. He's only a young lad about my age. He's Argentinian, and he brings a lot of Latin flavour to the music. He also plays a lot of original compositions, which is kind of rare in the gypsy jazz world, where a lot of the time you're playing Django's repertoire. A couple of standout tunes of his to check out would be Como una flor, Agridulce, La Muerte de un Lobo Bueno, and Simplicated. I'd also recommend checking out an album him and Adrian Moignard did together called Classico. It's full of their favourite Django numbers, and the virtuosity on display there is just insane. Incredible musicianship. Also, go way back in time and listen to some Oscar Aleman. He was Argentina's answer to Django Reinhardt. Check out his versions of Bésame Mucho and Russian Lullaby, as well as his own composition Hombre Mio. As you may have gathered, I'm a huge fan of this subgenre of gypsy jazz and Latin music in general. I could go on about it for hours, but I guess we'll have to leave that there for now. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next week.